The Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order. We'll take the items up in the order that they appear on the agenda. We'll begin with item number 1.
Item number 1 are communications from the Controller relative to a follow-up audit of the city's comprehensive strategy for fighting gang violence. This matter was also referred to Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee.
Okay, thank you. Is anybody here from the Controller's office? What happened to our seats? We used to have more seats in here.
I don't know. They keep taking
Got to label them.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. And this was a follow-up of the February 2008 blueprint for a comprehensive citywide anti-gang strategy. The blueprint was to be a roadmap for the city to undertake an effective citywide anti-gang strategy in an expedient, accountable, and transparent manner. We independently assessed the status of each of the blueprint's recommendations and identified any concerns with delayed corrective actions or alternative solutions proposed. Internal audit staff at the Controller's Office conducted the review with some subject matter expertise provided by Dr. Georgia Leap. Our follow-up looked at all of the blueprint's recommendations. There were over 100, but I'll discuss this morning just the primary recommendations made in the blueprint that address the following areas. Create a single office to coordinate citywide anti-gang services, build upon and develop regional partnerships with LAUSD, LA County, and other local governments, conduct community-based and department-wide needs assessments, redirect funds to the gang reduction strategy, reinvent youth and family services, and establish rigorous performance measures and conduct evaluations of both city and contracted programs. As you know, the Mayor's Office hired a director and established the Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development. I'll refer to it as GRID. The office became operational in July 2008. GRID serves as the city's unified voice for all anti-gang efforts. Given the significant amount of work involved with implementing a new citywide strategy, we found the GRID office has made considerable progress in addressing the blueprint's recommendations, and that most of the recommendations are in progress of being implemented. Many of these recommendations are long-term approaches and they require time to implement. Our audit did note some key areas where additional focus is needed. Initial efforts must continue in order to carry out the blueprint's recommended actions relating to collaboration, needs assessments, consolidating general youth and family development programs with anti-gang services, and evaluating the overall success of the anti-gang strategy. I feel like I can go over each of those areas.
Sure.
Okay. In the first area, what we noted is that the GRID cabinet was established with representatives from many city agencies involved with anti-gang services. The county's chief executive office and LAUSD also have representatives on the cabinet. The cabinet is a good start for opening the lines of communication within and outside the city to help foster coordination and collaboration. However, the cabinet's initial work has focused on direct programs rather than what is needed from a policymaking body. We also found that the cabinet lacks a strategic plan and formal delineation of roles and responsibilities, which hampers the ability to have a long-term institutional structure and to establish accountability by participating entities. The GRID cabinet should act as a policymaking body and could also oversee the general youth development services to ensure collaboration of all youth and family development services on a broader basis, which was envisioned by the blueprint. Number 2, through the GRID cabinet, as I've mentioned, the efforts have started to include LAUSD in the county in coordinating the anti-gang strategies. However, at this point, the GRID office is focusing first on improving coordination and collaboration with other city departments before taking on the bigger challenge of coordinating with external entities. If inroads cannot be established with the city's regional partners in the near future, Los Angeles will continue to respond to the gang reduction strategy in an isolated manner and risk having programs that are less effective or duplicative of those provided elsewhere. What we found is that there needs to be a concerted effort to establish formal working relationships, but without an overarching authority, the city faces a significant challenge in making its priorities LAUSD's and the county's priorities. The third area, the blueprint recommended that community and department level needs assessments be conducted to ensure that services provided meet the needs of the community and identify any service gaps. The Grid Office has contracted for an initial community needs assessment for the 12 gang reduction youth development zones, but it's not yet determined when future needs assessments will be conducted. And since the characteristics and needs of a community evolve as the population or other factors change, it's important to ensure that these changes are considered when defining the services that will be provided. Otherwise, there's a risk that resources may be wasted. The blueprint also recommended interdisciplinary community assessment teams, also referred to as ICATs, as a way to mitigate the risk of programs not reflecting current community concerns or conditions. The Grid Office has developed the local advisory committee, this is being done on a pilot basis, as an alternative community-level multi-agency team to meet the intent of the ICATs. We found that that's a reasonable alternative, but there's currently no provision for an assessment team member. And without this expertise, we think the Grid Office will lack the ability to assess the community's needs on an ongoing basis and adjust the programs and approaches accordingly. With regard to the department level needs assessment, the Grid Office has received inventories of anti-gang services currently provided by city departments. That was through the Grid Cabinet. And they understand the benefits of department level needs assessments, but currently there's no plan to require departments to develop and submit needs assessments or submit department strategic plans related to their anti-gang programs. By not having a complete understanding of the citywide efforts and citywide needs beyond the grid zones and the resources available, there is a risk that unidentified target populations and service gaps could remain. In the fourth area, the blueprint identified 3 CDD programs and the related funding, which totaled about $19 million, that should be redirected toward focused, high-priority outcomes that correspond to the city's top priorities, one of which is gang reduction. At this time, the decision is to focus on specific gang reduction efforts through targeted prevention and intervention programs, and the city did not transition the identified programs and funding from CDD to GRID. The identified programs did not include LA Bridges 1 and 2 programs and funding, but those have since been transferred to GRID. CDD, as an alternative, CDD has proposed to redesign its human services delivery system. As of our review, the redesign proposal was still in draft and being discussed with city leaders, city council. Grid management indicated that the CDD redesign would be reassessed in 3 years to determine if it's appropriate to keep that redesigned youth and family programs within CDD. We fully understand that absorbing all youth development programs by such a relatively new office would be a
It's the pipes in the wall. It's not the
would
audio.
be a huge undertaking. However, the blueprint had recommended the consolidation of anti-gang and youth development services as a means to ensure a citywide coordinated approach and to provide the city's youth and their families with a continuum of seamless care. So unless there's specific plans and procedures to achieve that coordinated approach, then the city risks not having a comprehensive strategy that aligns anti-gang services with general youth and family development programs and cannot be assured that limited resources are being leveraged to the maximum extent possible. And in the last area, this relates to evaluating the performance of anti-gang programs. The Grid Office is contracting with one firm to develop and conduct the evaluation of the prevention and intervention programs. At the time that we did our review, they were still going through the contract selection process for the evaluators, so we were not able to comment on whether the proposed evaluation methodology is sound and appropriate. But the plans for the program evaluation of anti-gang services by Grid will not include an evaluation of other city departments. Without a comprehensive evaluation of all coordinated efforts, the city cannot be assured as to the effectiveness of the citywide strategy towards solving the problem of gangs. We also identified a potential risk that the data collected by service providers may not be reliable or the most appropriate for future evaluations. The programs that are being funded through Grid Office will utilize CDD's Integrated Services Information System, or ISIS, to capture and report Grid client data. Prior controller audits had identified data integrity issues mostly because the service providers were not held to a standard protocol for inputting client data, which would ensure data accuracy and consistency. So we recommend that GRID ensure that the anti-gang service providers follow standardized data entry procedures to mitigate that risk. And lastly, due to the timing of selecting the new prevention and intervention service providers, client data will be collected and submitted by contractors for a few months before the program evaluator is formally on board and has formally identified what the specific data needs will be. As a result, the data collected until that time may not meet the specific needs of the program evaluator. That's a potential risk. Those are the highlights.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Now, when it comes to the controller's proposal of the grid cabinet be established, the particular language jumped out at me and said be established as a policy-making body. Did they mean recommending policy to the mayor's office and to the council or what have you, or to actually make policy and therefore that's the last word and we need to move forward with that policy?
I think as having the representatives from all of the city departments that are providing anti-gang services, we really saw this body as being the one that could help develop policy, could help develop a strategic plan and the approach that should be used. This would establish the framework that would then be defined in more goals, specific goals and objectives. Then the individual departments in the grid office would be responsible for carrying those out.
So it wouldn't be a policy-making body. It would be a group of department heads and other individuals that actually have day-to-day responsibilities and need to learn how to interact and correspond and collaborate with each other and make improvements to their own activities and assist with all the other elements to improve their networking and effectiveness as a whole. And then therefore, but it's not so much policy making, then it would be policy development.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I worked really hard to become a council member, and so did my 14 other colleagues, to be the policy making body of the city. It's a lot of responsibility and it's a lot of sacrifice to have that responsibility on our shoulders. I just wanted to make sure that we understood. So you're talking about a policy development.
Right. We were trying to make a distinction between folks that were really in the on the ground overseeing specific programs at the community level versus a little bit higher level than that.
Okay. All right. Now, did you interview the department heads that serve on the grid cabinet, or did you get any community input about how that's coming along, or from any of the council offices?
We interviewed a sample of a few of the grid cabinet members that were representatives of the various departments, one community member that was on the committee, cabinet.
Okay. But not specifically community members that may have opinion or input beyond that?
No, we talked to those folks that were on the cabinet, and it was just a select number just to see how they thought it was going.
Okay, so you focused only on the members of the cabinet.
Correct.
Okay. So therefore you didn't have any input from the city council offices on that element?
No.
Unless they were on the cabinet and they happen to be
Right,
part
right.
of, okay, which they're not, as far as I'm aware of. Okay. So based on what you've looked at, do you have any comments on what the mayor's plans and goals seem to be for the grid cabinet and the development of it and where it's at, where it's going?
Well, I mean, I think it had just started as we started our review, and what we saw is an enthusiastic group. I think they were interested in moving forward with plans, particularly with looking at 2 pilot projects and really getting into the details of that. So I think there was a lot of positive and good energy towards that. We wanted to make sure that energy and that focus was not lost and would be harnessed more in providing more of an institutional framework that could be carried on a long term and not just see short-term successes, but really see something that was going to be more long-term. So that's what we're looking for, is more that there's going to be a strategic framework and plan that would be developed by the cabinet. I hope that answers.
The cabinet was in its beginning stages when
Yes.
you looked at it and spoke to some of the members. So you didn't, as far as you're aware, you didn't talk to the mayor's office about what their plans were, what their blueprint was?
The grid office?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, no, we dealt very, very closely with the grid office.
Okay,
And
now,
also with CDD and those.
what did they give you or tell you about the future plans and development of what it's going to look like tomorrow?
You know, I think that's being formed as we were doing the review. I think the overall approach that we got from Grid is a focused and direct approach to carrying out and showing some immediate success and kind of setting the foundation, if you will, for getting some programs out there in the communities. Not letting service gaps appear, especially in taking over LA Bridges 1 and 2, that they took care to make sure that contracts, that there was going to be a continuum of service and there wouldn't be gaps to those providers. So I think they have an idea of what they're going to do in the future, but I think most of it was focused on today and very short term, what it is that we need to do to keep this strategy going forward.
Okay, so you, at the time that you were looking into the grid cabinet, you saw that most of the emphasis was to develop it and to get it going and to find I guess a rhythm,
Yes.
I should say, to what it will look like.
Yes.
Okay, and then I guess in future audits, then there'll be more time spent on what it has done.
Exactly.
There'll be a track record.
Right.
Okay, all right. So has the controller been briefed by the CDD on their plans to redesign the human services delivery system?
We did see a draft proposal of how they envision the redesign. Many of the things that seem to be contained in the draft seem to address the issues that were brought up in the blueprint. We talked with CDD department. They indicate, some of the things that they're going to be doing is streamlining the contracts and reducing the number of contracts, and those were things that were brought out in the blueprint. So the plan looked like it was going to address things, but because it's still in draft form, we take a more conservative view and report it as not yet implemented. If they continue on this track, and that's what seems to be the case, if it gets final approval from council, then it looks like it would be on the right track. But that would be something that would need to be looked at and examined by folks that are involved with anti-gang efforts to make sure that everything and youth development are all, that coordination and collaboration is really in place and becomes operational.
Okay. So at this time, the controller doesn't have any recommendations on a newly redesigned system to integrate into other city anti-gang efforts when it comes to CDD?
Correct. Except that we acknowledge, we're trying to point out that there needs to be that coordination. We're comfortable with the alternative that's being proposed. I know the blueprint was that everything be consolidated into one office. At this point in time, the city's taking a different direction, and that's fine. It's okay. We just want to make sure that the underlying issue of making sure that there's that collaboration and coordination is still there.
Okay.
That it's maintained separately is okay, but as long as you have that, a mechanism for maintaining coordination.
Okay. Speaking of coordination and networking, what are your recommendations for the mayor's office when it comes to having a stronger, more effective working relationship with LAUSD in the county?
Well, that's what I tried to bring out is there is no overarching authority over both entities, and that becomes it's very challenging. The grid director does sit on the county's steering committee. He's a participant on their committee. That's similar to our grid cabinet, while they have a representative. It would seem to be something that the city leaders, in talking to one another, could maybe help promote a better working relationship. I think as both cabinets really start, the county's committee, and then as the city's cabinet really start coming up with more formal plans and framework for how they're going to work, if there's a way to get formal MOUs, I think that would formalize a relationship and really define roles and responsibilities and how they're going to interact with one another.
Okay. So it appears that opportunity seems to be developing and hopefully
Yes.
will materialize into mechanisms that would be able to afford that strong relationship
Yes.
and communication. Okay. So again, it's in development stages. In the audit, you state that the mayor's office has no plans for program evaluation of general youth development services, and that the data collected by service providers may not be reliable for the most appropriate for future evaluation efforts. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the first part of your question, that they don't have any plans. At this time, when we were meeting with GRID, and they're getting their program evaluator on board to evaluate their prevention and intervention service providers. So they're working with those programs first. What we didn't see is there's no plan at this point in time to encompass other youth development programs, which would be housed in CDD or potentially in other city departments. As far as the data reliability, we're just saying that there's a potential risk. We just want to make GRID office aware of that, given the system that they're using, CDD's ISIS system. It wasn't the system that we had issues with, it was more the data input. Without having a standardized way of inputting the information, how you're going to input it, what you're going to input, you get all kinds of data that's in there, and then what ends up happening is it's not useful when you print out reports. It really doesn't mean anything. The GRID office indicated that they do have standardized protocols for what they're going to have the providers input. They're going to have training for the providers on how to do the input, and they'll be overseeing the data that gets input to make sure that their protocols are being followed. As far as the other issue with the data being collected, because there was just a timing difference in trying to make sure that there was still continued service being provided to the communities. The prevention and intervention contract providers were already on board before they were able to get to the program evaluation. The program evaluator, I believe, is going to be on board in April. Okay. There's going to be a few months there where the providers will be inputting data that has been defined. We're not saying that that's not the right data, but there's just a potential that the program evaluator may need additional information, may need slightly different information, and so it's just something that they'll have to consider on how that would impact the data that they will need to do the evaluation at the end of the period.
Okay.
Just because of the time lag, and that's something that just couldn't be addressed in a different way.
Now, is the controller making any recommendation to the mayor's office on that point that would make it more appropriate for future evaluations as to what the controller is looking for or expects to see?
Well, I think for now, if they can, at this point in time, they will just need to work with their program evaluator and see how best to mitigate that risk. There may not be any risk. There may not be any problem, excuse me. The data that's being collected may be perfectly suitable for what the program evaluator is going to need. In the future, the data that needs to be captured will probably be defined well before they go out for new contracts or renew contracts, however that's going to work out. So that would be all set up right at the very beginning, and then that would be indicated in the RFPs and then within the contracts with the service providers. So they'd know exactly right from the beginning what they should be collecting, and that would be in line with the program evaluator's needs.
Okay, thank you. At this time on this item, we'll open it up for public comment. Is there anybody here for public comment on item number 1? I do have a public comment card for item number 2, but not item number 1. Okay. With that, what we're going to do is, seeing that nobody's coming up for public comment, we'll go ahead and put this item over when the controller, her schedule can afford her to come forward, and also the subject matter expert. It's from UCLA, Georgia Lee.
Georgia Lee.
Yeah. We'll have them so we can close out some additional questions and then move this item forward. So with that, we'll hold the item in committee and then request that the controller come forward and answer some of the last few questions we have, and also hopefully we'll have Georgia Leap here as well. Okay, thank you. We'll now move to item number 3. It should take 2 minutes. Item number 3.
Item number 3 are communication from the mayor and city administrative officer report relative to the acceptance of fiscal year 2008 California Gang Reduction Intervention Prevention Program grant.
Okay. Last time I think we didn't have the report, and now we do, and basically it's making recommendations to have a more condensed expenditure plan to better pay for proposed services, and also adjustments to proposed matching funds to rely less on private donations. Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. So with that, this committee will send forth the approval of the CAO recommendations. Okay. We now go back to anybody here for public comment on 3? I don't see any. Public comment on 3 is now closed. With that, we'll move that CAO recommendations forward. And now we'll go back to 2, item number 2.
Item number 2 are communication from the mayor and a city administrative officer report relative to selection of gang reduction and youth development zone intervention services providers, gang prevention and intervention services providers outside the grid zones, and grid evaluation services provider.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Carr from the Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction Youth Development. Just a few brief opening statements. And first of all, on November 5th, 2008, the Grid Office issued 3 requests for proposals for the implementation of gang intervention services in the 12 grid zones, gang intervention prevention services in areas of need outside of the grid zones, and a thorough evaluation of the grid strategy. For the intervention RFP, we actually have we've outlined a term of 6 months with funding in the amount of $3 million, which is $250,000 per zone. And the funds are coming from the general fund, federal monies, which include the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, the Edward Byrne grant, and those are all for gang intervention services in the 12 zones. For the non-grid, non-gang reduction youth development zones, we also are proposing a 6-month term with funding in the amount of $1.2 million, $750,000 for gang prevention and $450,000 for gang intervention. And these funds are available from the general fund for both gang prevention intervention services in areas that are of need outside of those 12 areas. And then lastly, the third one is for evaluation. We're proposing a 12-month term for this contract with funding in the amount of $900,000, which again funding is made available from the general fund, our contractual services account, which was approved in this current fiscal year budget to evaluate our entire strategy. Just as a reminder, we conducted 11 of the 12 needs assessments were conducted. Boyle Heights, we used updated data from a 2003 as well as a 2003 needs assessment. Those needs assessments were actually produced by the Advancement Project, Cal State LA, and Harder and Company during the course of those evaluations. As I mentioned, the Boyle Heights Hollenbeck Grid Zone was conducted by the folks from the Homeland Security and Public Safety team back in 2003 under the previous administration. And then we had that data updated through a process that Councilman Huizar has been going through with the Healthy Cities Project. In terms of the proposal review process, the selection process for all RFPs included a local panel review of written applications, a comprehensive review of top scoring proposals by our oversight committee, and interviews and site visits of top scoring agencies in each designated cohort. In terms of the non-gang reduction youth development review methodologies, proposers were asked to define areas in need of gang prevention and/or gang intervention services, and the required minimum characteristics were number one, to be geographically specific. Number two, to have high levels or demonstrate high levels of gang crime and violence, i.e. through LAPD statistics. Thirdly, high number of youth and young adults ages 14 to 25 on probation and/or parole. The fourth, there was a high number of high school dropouts and truancy rates. And fifthly, high rates of poverty and unemployment. And lastly, a high population density. Now, after we received those proposals, further analysis of the 2008 gang crime statistics in each of the organization's proposed target areas was done to ensure that the need for prevention and intervention services was supported by police data. We then held an appeals process, and during the appeals process, each agency was given the opportunity to submit a request for an appeal and present their case before the appeals board. 8 appeal requests were submitted. 8 appeals were heard. 1 appeal was not forwarded for additional review. 6 appellants received score modifications, but these modifications did not result in ranking or in recommendation changes. The agencies were notified in writing of our final funding recommendations, and we're asking that this committee accept our recommendation to negotiate and execute 21 contracts with these 13 contractors to provide gang prevention, intervention, and evaluation services, and to move forward to City Council for consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The appeals process, what was the length of time between where people had an opportunity to make an appeal and then the process to get a response and answer about that repeal?
There were 2 different opportunities for appeals, both on February 13th and February 20th. We gave the first group of appellants or people who didn't get recommended for funding, as soon as that notification was made, they were actually then given the opportunity to make an appeal. I'm looking here for the date of when those letters were sent. I'll have to look for that, get that to you in a minute. But there was ample time. I believe it was a week or 2 weeks in the first go-around, and then it was at least 5 business days on the second go-around.
Mm-hmm. And these are usually organizations that are in the basin. It's not like they have to get on a plane and fly from D.C. to come on out and...
No, for the intervention and prevention contractors, they're all local people. We didn't have anyone appeal the evaluation RFPs, so we were prepared to handle that, especially for groups that were outside of the jurisdiction, but we didn't have any actually of the groups appeal.
So the element of enough time for appeal and to prepare and to present and things of that and to hear didn't come into play or doesn't seem to be an issue so far?
We don't believe so. We were advised by the city attorney to allow at least 5 days of 5 working days for those appeals, and we followed their instruction.
Okay. Okay. So far, when it comes to the RFPs for gang prevention, intervention, and evaluation, although there have been some appeals, none of those appeals have changed the outcomes of the recommendations of who was being recommended for these contracts?
No, none of these did. That's correct.
But in some cases, some of the evaluations appeals did, in fact, result in a changing score?
That's correct. Right. I believe actually in the case in this round, actually 6 of the 8 actually did get, they received score modifications, so their points were adjusted based on their appeal. Our office's further review upon the recommendation of the appeals board, some slight adjustments were made to their score.
And you mentioned earlier that 1 went forward. What did you mean by that? Went forward?
No, one appeal was not forwarded for additional review. The appeals board suggested it didn't merit a full review.
Okay, 1 was not forwarded. Okay. All right. Okay. Would the evaluation contractor review the overall selection process and appeals process?
No, we're asking them to evaluate the actual strategy, the implementation of the strategy itself. So we're not contracting with the evaluator to evaluate our RFP process that they competed in.
Okay. but they didn't compete in the categories of intervention and prevention.
No, but the process was very similar to the other processes. So,
All right. How about will the evaluation contractor incorporate the community-based gang intervention measurements that the council passed in September of last year?
well, yeah, as you know, in the RFP itself, we were very explicit in the gang intervention RFP that we were asking proposers to actually implement the two-pronged approach for violence interruption as well as wraparound service provision, and so that was very explicit in the RFP, and it'll be very explicit in the contracts that we negotiate with each one of the proposers. So we would expect that that'll be one of the primary things they'll be evaluating.
Okay, so the evaluator will be expected to understand that model and understand those evaluation paradigms, because as far as I can tell, especially when it comes to intervention, no city, no county, no jurisdiction in the country has defined intervention the way Los Angeles has, and it doesn't seem like any jurisdiction either has as limited as our network is with the number of interventionists. We know we need more. Everybody has said that. It doesn't seem like any other jurisdictions are allowing us the opportunity to say, wow, they've taken it to the next level. We can learn from them or grow from them. It seems like we're actually on the cutting edge here.
Well, as you know, in Los Angeles, we have the magnitude of both the challenge here as well as the magnitude of our response is unparalleled. I mean, the next closest city would have less than half of the gang problem that we have, as well as probably less than half of the intervention, and particularly in California, which would be, many people would feel is the state in the country that has the most challenges with this problem. Even in California, Los Angeles just dwarfs the other cities that are trying to deal with this issue. So probably I was just at a meeting last week, the second largest city that's probably making significant investments is San Jose, and they're investing $4 million to address this issue. We're investing, 6 times that amount. So,
Okay, so it's important for the evaluators to understand there's a certain amount of expertise that they bring to the table. They do evaluations. I'm sure and expect they're good at it, but they're doing something that perhaps they've never done and nobody else has ever done, making these kinds of evaluations upon programs of this magnitude, and like you said, the challenges of this magnitude here as well.
Yeah, the good thing is with our recommended evaluator, it's the Urban Institute from Washington, D.C., but they've partnered with a local Harder and Company, and the Urban Institute actually did the evaluation of the gang reduction program, which was a 5-city pilot piloted by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, of which Boyle Heights in Los Angeles was one of the sites. And so they, even though they're in Washington, D.C., they have a great familiarity with Los Angeles, and then Harder Company is actually a local research and evaluation group here in Los Angeles. So we feel very confident that they have both the national perspective to try and look at this from a national perspective, but also the understanding of the uniqueness and the flavor of Los Angeles that we have here.
Now, when it comes to the evaluations, what balance of expectation are you having upon the evaluators, not only to see that the organizations are actually following the responsibilities, the contractual responsibilities in doing the work, but what's the balance of them evaluating and giving their opinion about how effective these organizations are on the outcomes, the actual results?
Well, that's really their primary responsibility. We don't see their role as being the watchdogs for contractual compliance. That's our office's responsibility. What we're really asking them to do is to help us determine what's the data that they need to collect to be able to determine whether or not those outcomes are being achieved, which is to reduce violence and reduce the number of young people who are actually joining gangs or active gang members who are transitioning out. So their responsibility is to really focus in on that, and then to look at the programs themselves to see if their process is actually consistent. Is it consistent with the model that we've laid out? Are they following that model? Are there variances from that? And then recommendations to us as to what's working, what's not working, where they recommend that we should actually be changes. I think the important thing is that this isn't a what we're proposing here is not a one-off evaluation, sort of, hire some outside consultants, come in, evaluate this program, and then give us a report and then hit the road. We're proposing to invest this amount, $900,000, on an annual basis to have this be an ongoing reflection action process where we actually get feedback from them as to the effectiveness of this. They tell us what's working, what's not. We make adjustments. They continue with us to evaluate that over time to determine whether or not we're achieving the success we hope to have.
Okay, and that's one of the things that I think all of us promised in this new paradigm that we're in when it comes to the challenges that our city has, is that we promised that we would actually have evaluations and that we would have outcomes and that we'd be honest with ourselves about where adjustments need to be made, and then to continue to improve not only on our processes but hopefully improve on our results. So $900,000 sounds like a lot. I think it is, but it isn't.
It's about 5% of our contractual services.
Yeah. But at the same time, when it comes to these evaluation, that puts certain responsibilities and burdens, and appropriately so, on the actual service providers. And in the contracts with the service providers, are you comfortable that they are afforded enough resources in order for them to prepare and cooperate and to work with the evaluators and your office, so that when they do the work that they do, they can actually report, correspond, dialogue, and then make those adjustments?
Yeah, we actually, as part of the contractual, well, as part of the proposal, and then as for the contracts that we've already established, as well as the ones we will, we've asked all of the contractors to set aside 5% of their overall budget for data collection and to dedicate a person for data collection. So we've tried to build into the agency budget as well the resources for them to actually be able to have funds to be able to integrate and interface with the evaluators as well, so that we can ensure that we get that data that we need.
Okay. So basically, no excuses. 6 months down the road, a year down the road, or what have you, somebody comes in, be it an evaluator or your office, and you say, we need to sit down and see how things are going along. What are your results? Let's get some preliminary information here. There's no excuses to say we haven't done it, or we can't afford to do it. In the actual contracts with the prevention and intervention organizations, they are well aware from the beginning in their contract that they needed to prepare and to go, to have that information running alongside with their day-to-day activity.
Mm-hmm. And our job will be to make sure they continue to understand that, they continue to prioritize that, and then if someone decides they don't want to participate in that, then take the necessary actions.
Yeah, because I think in the past, no offense to CDD or the organizations, I don't think it was very clear on behalf of the city that we should expect that, nor did we prepare our department or the organizations to actually understand how important that was. And that was one of the things that I know I wanted to make sure that we didn't allow ourselves to not have what you just described.
Well, the mayor's
Contracts
office
say so. The resources should be there. They're being afforded the resources to do so. We have an evaluation component here. You have ongoing day-to-day interaction with your office and these providers. So again, no excuses, right? That's the kind of system we expect to have, where it's no excuses.
The system is in place, and now it'll be the opportunity to actually deliver on that. Absolutely.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the mayor's office's plan on utilizing ISIS, how is that developing? And secondly, does the current system allow for interfacing between the gang intervention contractors and the providers of service and the other city departments and the services they have? As was mentioned earlier, when we were getting a report on the controller's audit, they actually mentioned the need for that correspondence with the other service that the city's providing.
Well, we have been working with the department at looking at if the GRP project, gang reduction project in Boyle Heights, actually used ISIS and then had some modified it, personalized it, if you will, for the GRP project there. Our decision was to do a very similar thing and modify that system for our purposes. We just found out about a week ago the department is looking at, as part of their redesign, possibly completely redesigning their human service delivery system, what they're going to do, and maybe redesigning their data collection system as well. So I have a meeting, I believe it's next week or the following week, with ITA, with the department, technology department, to really talk to them about how we make sure that we're integrating our data collection system. And one of the challenges, as you know, from chairing ITA committee, is that we have a multitude of systems that run independent of one another, don't talk to each other, and in some places are very duplicative. So one of the things we actually, when we started talking about a data collection, computerized data collection system, we actually went to ITA before we made any final decisions and got their recommendation. They were actually the ones that recommended us to look at using the ISIS system. And with this change, we're actually going back to ITA and asking them to continue to give us direction as to how to move on that.
Okay, it's really important that the system that's utilized in this one, it's identified as ISIS, that it actually has the capability of making sure that above and beyond, for example, the grid zones activity, of the activity going on in your office, which is a lot of different components, but then we have the other social service components are being provided by the city and then also by the county. It's important that we identify a system that hopefully doesn't have any shortcomings, that does not allow for that correspondence. And one of the other elements that we've been promising the taxpayers in the community of Los Angeles is that we wouldn't have duplication, duplication of services, duplication of effort where we're not being efficient. And so this ISIS system is going to be a key component. When do you anticipate that you'll know how comfortable that you are that the ISIS system is going to be able to meet that responsibility and those needs?
I think I'll have a better sense of that after we actually have the meeting with the ITA. I think you're right. We're concerned and want to make sure it interfaces with whatever the Community Development Department is going to implement for the new human service delivery system, because, for example, we have an MOU with the department around their workforce development to actually have 500 slots for gang intervention agencies to make referrals for job training. We don't want to have one system that tracks an individual there that doesn't speak or communicate somehow or integrate what we're doing, because we'll be making referrals across that system. And then we're planning, once the new human service delivery system is actually reorganized, that actually we're talking with the department about having a referral MOU for our 10 to 15-year-old young people who are determined to not have all the risk factors necessary to be enrolled in our programs, to actually make sure they get referred to general prevention programs as well, and to track that system.
Okay. Yeah, the perfect example is the job placement and referrals. The last thing we need is to get somebody excited about the idea that somebody's going to try their best to help them find job placement, and then for some reason they may drop the ball, and then the organization or individual who referred them doesn't have any correspondence as to whether or not there was any success or not.
Right.
It's very frustrating when that happens. And unfortunately, the breakdown is usually in the feedback as to how it's going along.
Well, just so you know, our office is actually working to mitigate that. We're not completely depending on the technology. We actually have regular meetings scheduled regularly on a monthly basis between our intervention providers and the work source centers and our office in the Community Development Department to talk about that. And then the Community Development Department is actually working on a monthly report for us to be able to track how many young people and young adults who are gang affiliated have actually been made, who have been referred to the workforce development system, how many of those young people have actually been enrolled, and then over time we'll be tracking how many of them were actually placed in permanent or long-term employment. So we'll know of the gang-involved youth that have been referred through those 500 slots, exactly how many have been referred, enrolled, and who've actually achieved employment. So we'll be tracking that on a regular monthly basis with the department.
Okay. All right. So another check and balance, I guess you would call it. All right. How much has been set aside for the ISIS system application?
I believe we budgeted $100,000 in this fiscal year to do that, and then we'll budget similar amounts in the subsequent
The meeting
year.
with ITA will probably determine whether or not that's an adequate amount.
Yeah.
And
We
you'll
would
probably
hope.
get a more accurate figure subsequent to that correspondence.
Yeah, depending on what's going to be required to create a new system.
Okay. Have you or any of your team spoken to other departments in general to find out what their satisfaction or dissatisfaction is, or shortcomings or not that the ISIS system has based on the kinds of expectations you have for the ISIS system?
Well, we've actually, I believe the only group that's actually using the ISIS system is CDD-funded programs. So that would either be WorkSource, WIA and WorkSource and OneSource Center contractors. That would be all the family development networks, the neighborhood action programs, and there's one other program I'm blanking on the name. But so it's all pretty much the only users of that system are CDD-funded programs or CDD itself. And then our office did use it, actually has been using it in the GRP project in Boyle Heights. So we were fortunate in our office to have the program manager from Boyle Heights who actually helped create the interface that was on the GRP project, who worked for us. So she's very familiar with the strengths of the system as well as shortcomings. And so we were able to determine kind of what we wanted in terms of the design based on that experience. And that's what we put forth to ITA in terms of here's what we think we need. And then we'll obviously be working with the new evaluation and research contractor to actually help us make sure that we're collecting all the data that they need as well.
Okay. Now, what's been the response from the community regarding the youth eligibility tool?
We're in the very early stages of usage of that. Actually, the first 6 prevention providers have actually all been trained multiple times and actually have started implementing it. I believe a report I got last week is we've had about 200 young people that have been screened. We just trained the next cohort of prevention providers about 10 days ago to 2 weeks. We have subsequent trainings set up in the next few weeks and over the next few months to continue to work with both making sure that the agencies know how to use the assessment tool appropriately, to also help them in terms of their own strategies for outreach and recruitment to find eligible youth that we think are at risk. And then lastly, we're working to actually, right now that system is being implemented by a case manager, but we are working to actually computerize that system so that actually it uses an audio aided system, so the computer actually reads the questions to the young people to deal with literacy issues as well as in English and Spanish, and not in a computer voice. We're actually recording a human voice from the neighborhood, someone who's a native Spanish speaker, and English, to be able to actually read the question, so it's not some computer voice. And then the case manager will be there as well, and then that can actually will generate, once it's completed, generate a report that can be sent electronically to USC, who's actually then scoring those and then determining eligibility. So I would say we're making progress on that right now. About, I believe the latest number is about 28% of the young people that are screened are actually eligible, which is a little higher than what they had actually anticipated. As the volume of screenings has gone up, the eligibility numbers have gone down a little bit, so we're looking at that and tracking that on a weekly basis.
Okay. All right. Now, if when it comes to the youth eligibility tool, if there's something that either one of the providers or one of your staff feels as though there needs to be a change, give me an example of how you would go about making that adjustment.
We've actually developed a policy that the agencies can actually challenge the assessment if they think that actually the assessment was inaccurate. There's actually a formal process that they can actually challenge that assessment, and then we've set up a committee. We've got an expert from UCLA who's actually helping us, who's not a part of the assessment team as well, who's actually helping us to look at those challenges. The contractor will actually make that appeal, if you will, and then it'll be evaluated, and we're going to do those on a monthly basis. So we've had, I believe right now we have about 4 or 5 that agencies have actually said they would like to challenge. They think that young person actually is at risk, or in some cases they might, because you can have 2 sort of failures. One could be the young person is already gang involved, so they've already gone beyond what the assessment tool, they're not at risk, they're actually active gang members, or they haven't exhibited enough risk factors at this point. They might be at risk of delinquency issues, but not necessarily of gang joining.
So the third-party providers definitely have avenues in which they can communicate with your office.
Yeah.
Like as you described, challenge. Now, but when it comes to that eligibility tool, if for some reason you find that some adjustment needs to be made to that and then sent back out for future eligibility, obviously you're not going to go back to other people that you've evaluated. What kind of mechanism do you have for that?
Well, we started working on this almost a year ago, and so we're probably already at version 12 or 13 since we first started with it. It was piloted before we actually ever started using it to determine eligibility, and then actually we've made some adjustments, clarified some questions along the way. The reason we worked with some of the folks at the universities is the whole idea is to actually try and perfect this eligibility tool. There's no one else in the country that's using an assessment tool that's very specific to risk factors related to gang joining. And so what our hope is over time, we'll be screening thousands of young people over the next number of years. We hope that we'll be able to actually find out the effectiveness of that tool in terms of predictability. Because the research is pretty consistent across this country, here in Los Angeles and actually in Europe, that only 15% of the kids in any given neighborhood, even in some of the most gang-challenged neighborhoods, are actually at risk of gang joining. So the idea with this assessment tool is if you could line up 100 young people from a neighborhood and you could pick out who the 15 were that really were most likely to join gangs, I think we'd all agree we'd want to invest the vast majority of our resources, as far as particularly those that are targeted to do gang prevention, we'd want to invest it in those 15 kids. So this assessment tool is our effort to try and get at that issue of trying to determine that we're working with the right kids who really are exhibiting the kind of risk factors for potential gang joining, and then obviously use that information to develop the kind of intervention in the lives of those kids to reduce or minimize those risk factors by increasing protective factors that will help reduce the likelihood of them joining gangs.
All right, thank you. Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay. We have 2 cards filled out on item number 2. We are on item number 2. We'll also open it up to public comment. Eddie Glass and Malik Spellman. Thank you. 2 minutes. Yes, your name again? Yes.
My name is Edie Glass, representing Riley Arts Foundation and Saving All Kids.
Okay.
I'm part of a network of collaboratives. We submitted a proposal in response to the non-grid RFP. We were not recommended for funding, so we filed an appeal and met before the appeals board. Our appeal was denied, and according to the appellate procedures, an appeal can be brought before the full City Council. I'm here to request that review by the City Council so that we can provide our concerns about the scoring process and the procedures for review used in our proposal. Yesterday, I received an email from my contact here at the city indicating that I should attend this meeting. That email was written after 5:30, so I had only the couple hours this morning to be here. And this meeting today is meant to be that appeal to the City Council. I don't think it's adequate. I'd like to request a continuance to be able to provide a written request for appeal.
And when you appealed, what was the official status or response to your appeal?
I got a letter, just a one-page letter, stating that the appeal was denied. We questioned the scoring as well as the review process.
Okay. And what kind of contract were you applying for? Intervention, prevention?
It was for prevention in a non-grid zone in Los Angeles.
Okay. And it's Riley Arts Foundation?
Yes, it is.
And your title?
Executive Director.
Have you ever contracted with the city in the past?
No, not
Your organization?
Not this organization. I've been involved with organizations and managed contracts with the city.
But not this
Not
organization?
this particular one.
And in the past, those organizations worked through with CDD, I presume?
Yes.
Okay. How about Park and Recs?
No, we are involved with Park and Recs right now. We don't have a contract. We do volunteer work
Okay.
with
All right.
Parks and Rec.
And what part of the city specifically were you applying for?
The area that is west of downtown, south of Pico Boulevard, north of the Santa Monica Freeway, and east of La Cienega.
Okay. All right. Okay. Do you have a copy of the correspondence that you were
No,
given?
actually, I had another meeting this morning, and I was able to break away from it. I don't have anything. I was in a meeting today from 8 until supposedly 11:30.
And your appeal was based on the methods overall, or?
Yes, the review process and the scoring itself. Particularly, I don't know what details you have there, but if you take a look at, do you have the actual numbers?
Yeah, I have the
Okay.
results.
I don't remember specifically, but I can say that the travel budget, for example, the budget, under the budget section, I think our score was 75 point something, and what the language used there was that they were looking for cost reasonableness. I think our score was 75 point whatever, and it was considered, the budget that we proposed was considered unreasonable, but that 75 point would indicate that that's well above average, or at least above average.
For that category?
Yes, with that particular rating. So, but that is not the only thing that caused concern for us. We received an email from the city indicating that we should reserve a certain day to have a site visit. And so we, of course, set aside that day. Later, we got an email giving us a specific day and time frame so that we planned that perhaps this meant we were in the top, among the top recommendations. Well, it turned out that we were not among the top, but that, to me, was misleading, and particularly when we saw the numbers and that 75 point, for example, indicating an above average score, we were very concerned that maybe someone wasn't really exercising the care that should have been involved in evaluating our proposal. So we wanted to bring to the attention of the appeals board how important it is to really take care, because when we have a contract, we're expected to carry out that contract as professionals. And it did not appear to us that this proposal was reviewed in a professional manner.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, I would just like the continuance to be able to put all of our concerns in writing and have them reviewed and responded to, rather than simply getting a denied or a no.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark Spellman?
Yes, hello everyone. Hello, council. My name is Malik Spellman. I'm with Unity 2 Gang Intervention and Prevention, and I'm here to lend support to Jeff Carr and the services of the City of Los Angeles in regards to reducing gang violence and the recidivism rates in our community. I feel as a community activist and as an active member in the intervention prevention community that it's important that we assess these programs based on the individual needs of the agencies that serve these particular grid areas, contingent upon the fact that every assessment of a child or an individual is based on the needs in the home and we are the future social workers of this society, and we don't have any inclination as to when and where and how this particular crisis may end, but we would like to send our support behind Mr. Cardenas and his staff, Mr. Jeff Carr, the Advancement Project, and the efforts of the Mayor's Office to help not only get rid of the genocide, but the fratricide that takes place in our community because of the overwhelming amount of problems that we do have. Although we are working on, again, different tactical frequencies, we're all tacticians from various components of our society, and it's very important that we combined our efforts to coordinate some sort of anti-gang service, not only for the future of our city, but for the future of the parents of this city who are living in such disgusting conditions concerning their children. I once heard Mr. Cardenas mention that he was afraid for his child to even walk down the street, and he's a city councilman living in a probably relatively decent community. So for us as intervention and prevention specialists, although we're tacticians from different areas, it's very important that we support the concept of the Mayor's Office, of Mr. Cardenas and Mr. Jeff Carr, and of course of the Advancement Project, so that we can make a better society for tomorrow. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here to speak on item number 2? Okay. City Attorney, can you come forward? Who's the city attorney on this matter? City attorneys? Okay. All right. Mr. Carr? Mr. Carr? This is obviously public information, the resultant scores, right? Of all the various categories, et cetera. The organization, Riley Arts Foundation, applied for what we call the West area.
In the west area, that's correct.
I presume you heard what Ms. Glass just mentioned. Is there anything you'd like to clarify on that, or?
Well, just that, as you know, we made it clear, we had an appeals process. We laid out the categories under which organizations could appeal. That was sent in all the responses where agencies were given their score along with the scoring sheet as to why they didn't score high enough to be recommended to move forward for a site visit and/or funding. And then they were also given a copy of that appeals process and instructed about how they could appeal. This group did make their appeal to our appeals board. Unfortunately, our appeals board felt like their appeal didn't have the merit that it needed to move forward based on their review of what was submitted to them and what was given in testimony. And they recommended we not move forward with that appeal. We had the city attorney there during the entire appeals process. They've advised us both on what that process is, and they suggested that we actually followed the process that we did set up in the beginning, and that we followed that fairly and appropriately applied it.
Okay. So the city attorney on this matter, who was following the process, at least on the procedural portion, didn't red flag anything about any internal procedures that may have been inadvertently misstepped or that there were any violations as far as that goes?
No.
Okay. So therefore it was left to the subjective portion of it, which is the evaluation scoring, and then whether or not their score was high enough. In this case, it appeared that their score was not high enough to have a site visit.
That's correct.
And therefore to vie for the cumulative score, which resulted in who would get the contract or not.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like what Ms. Glass said, at least on the elements of it, are the same as what you're saying. The only thing is that she feels that the score was too low and she wanted an opportunity to appeal that score.
Yeah, and she did appeal that score, and our appeals committee looked at her appeal as to why she thought we hadn't scored it fairly, and they said there wasn't any merit to it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Oh, by the way, was that, you mentioned earlier of 8 appeals and 1 did not go forward?
That was
and
the
that
one.
was the one that did not go forward?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just so that everybody understands, thank you, Mr. Carr. So just so that everybody understands, the matters that are before this committee are not concluded on behalf of the policy-making body of the city until it goes to the full council. And then at the full council, should we move forward with the item, agendize it, and also call it forward, and then have a vote of the council, then and only then is the actual action complete, and the ratification of the recommendation is actually taken or modified. So with that, is there anybody else here for public comment on item number 2? I have read 2 cards that I've received. Do we have any more cards? No? Okay. Again, we're on item number 2. Public comment has been open. We have participated in public comment on item number 2. Public comment on item number 2 is now closed. And with that, anything of my colleagues? Okay, all right. So with that, the recommendation of the CAO was to approve the item. We'll move that item forward to council. Do we have a council date on this?
Mr. Chair, this item is scheduled for tomorrow, Friday, March 6th, council meeting in Van Nuys.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So with that, again, it is agendized for tomorrow's council meeting. Should anything take place prior to that, and/or a council member call the item and request that it not be heard and completed, we could postpone the item within council to another date. I'm not saying that's going to happen. For those of you who are new to our process here in the city, I'm just letting you know that that is still an opportunity that could take place. Yes?
Councilmember, to be clear, did you mean to recommend to the council to adopt the CAO recommendations on this item?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. They've been modified from the mayor, so.
Okay. Yeah, that's the CAO recommendations. Okay. Thank you. So with that, we now move to item number 4.
Item number 4 is motion Cardenas Parks relative to the Los Angeles Police Department to work with the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners and the Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development regarding recommended police commission policy regarding community-based gang intervention.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Police Commission. The Commission is in receipt of your motion, sir, and we are working with the department. Chief Beck has been the main person. Chief Beck is out of the country on city business currently. We would anticipate having a report through the Board of Police Commissioners to the committee within the next 30 days in response to the suggested language in the motion, or the policy, excuse me, working with the department to get their input, and then through the commission input, and bring it to the committee for discussion with the committee.
Okay. And as far as the commission or the department's concerned, is there any questions you have of the maker of the motion?
I do not, sir. I can't speak for the department. That would be Chief Beck is who I've been dealing with on that. So from the commission's perspective, we want to get input from the department as to the items in the motion, evaluate that, and then bring that through the commission.
Okay. So as far as you can tell right now, there's not that there isn't any clarification that needs to be done, but as far as you can tell right now, there hasn't been any correspondence regarding any concerns so far.
So far, none has been brought to my attention, sir. Yes, sir.
And you anticipate hopefully in the next 30 days,
yes, sir,
it'll be before the commission?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Is there anybody here to speak on item number 4? Anybody here to speak on item number 4? Seeing and hearing none, nobody come forward on item number 4. Public comment is closed on item number 4. With that, this committee will adopt the motion. And with that, that concludes the 4 items on the agenda for this committee. And all right. Is there anybody here for general public comment? General public comment to this committee? Anybody like to come forward for general public comment? Those are items that are not agendized on this committee, but that fall under the purview of this committee. Okay? Seeing and hearing no one come forward, general public comment is closed on this committee. This committee is now adjourned. Thank you.